Hello, I'm Dr. Jovita Lee, Policy Director for Advanced Carolina, and we are back with another installment of Advanced Notice. And thank y'all for joining me today.
Thank you.
And so I am joined by Tamika Walker Kelly, the president of North Carolina Association of Educators, and Marcus Bass, the executive director of Advanced Carolina. And so today we are going to talk about Senate Bill 227, which is eliminating DEI in public education. And so I want to start the conversation with you. And so there are so many misconceptions around what diversity, equity, and inclusion are and who actually benefits from it. And so could you talk a little bit more about what it actually is, who benefits from it, and why we're having this conversation today?
Well, first, thank you for having me here to talk about this bill. And wanted to say, of course, at NCAE, we're continuing to do our analysis and reading of the bill and its impacts. And so this is very early, but do want to highlight that, of course, we've heard a lot about banning DEI in schools and in government when we're really talking about banning the very tenets in which public education is founded on.
Yeah.
Our schools are full of diverse students and communities, diverse educators. We are inclusive. Public schools are open and welcome to every single child. And also, we want to make sure that every single child has the resources that they need in order to thrive in our schools. So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our schools, we are talking about respecting children as they are and how they come to the classroom and making sure that they get what they need in order to survive in a global environment and in their communities. Every community is different. Every student is different when they come into our school, and every educator is different as well. And so we want to equip our public schools with the tools and resources to be able to meet the needs of students where they are and carry them where they need to go. And so we know that the language is being raised or leveraged in a way that is the antithesis of public schools. And it is meant to inflame and stoke anger and fear and misconceptions, when then the reality is that our public schools do not operate in that manner. We want to ensure that every student thrives.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on a really good point about the language being inflammatory, right, with this piece of legislation. But we also recently saw another piece of legislation, HB 171, which is another DEI related bill. And so coming off the heels of that, Marcus, and now we're seeing Senate Bill 227, a direct attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion in schools. What is the potential long-term impact of these compounding bills around DEI?
That's a very good question. It's not surprising that the General Assembly first introduced a blanket DEI prohibition bill, and then they pulled that back. It was actually supposed to be voted on Tuesday, the first time in the House. Interestingly enough, after last week's announcement of addressing these concerns by the Legislative Black Caucus and some other subsequent actions, it seems to be they have kind of reversed course. But what they have done is now inserted this new bill. In some cases, Senate Bill 227 is a fraction of this larger anti-DEI push by the General Assembly. And I think what's interesting here is that last year we saw the attacks on our public education, where a lot of our higher ed schools in the UNC system were having to rewrite entire departments and divisions. That was the beginning of a prohibition on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm glad you all have started saying the entire name, not just DEI. Because when you don't really pronounce the acronym, you are missing the conversation. They want us to use this coded language of wokeness to really mean black. And DEI in a very real way in their mind means black only. But we know that there are a large population of individuals that have found provisions for inclusion under diversity, equity, and inclusion. House Bill 171 was an attempt to create a real stop of DEI, of diversity, equity, inclusion in state government. It would remove entire departments. It would do an audit of state government around DEI policies. And the most important part, which I thought was very alarming, it would place any individual that is in elected office that is found in support of DEI initiatives, they would be impeached. Yeah. No due process, right. Just legislative hate. And in a very real way, I think that was, just like we've seen in the federal level, these measures are going way farther than individuals that really had racial intent were hoping. They were hoping that it would just invoke fear and stoke fear in black people. But what they're seeing now is that a larger number of individuals were protected under DEI. And a lot of those individuals are speaking out. We're talking about veterans. We're talking about individuals that have students with different abilities or families living with different able students. We're talking about populations of people that not for color reasons, not for reasons of race, but for reasons of access and ability were protected under DEI provisions. And now everybody is suffering because the Republicans are legislating hate through this battle against DEI, this battle against wokeness. 171 was a marker there, and this Senate Bill 117 is just like that.
Absolutely. And so thinking about one of those protected classes, the students, what will the future of public school curriculum look like? What will be the future for students in regards of having a holistic learning experience if this legislation were to pass? Could you say more about that?
Well, one of the things that is really confusing about bills like these, because this is not the first iteration of divisive concepts that has come through the General Assembly. What is really difficult is to untangle what that means specifically around public school curriculum. Lots of our public school curriculum and subject matter and content is rooted in teaching students about their communities and the world around them. Yeah. And so if we are not talking about Native American culture, if we are not talking about Hispanic culture, if we're not talking about white culture, if we're not talking about black culture, if we, by the prescript of this law, are not able to talk about those things, then how can we make sure that our students are receiving an honest and accurate education? That's right. And they are critical to our students being globally competitive, as state leaders have said that they want students to be, as educators want them to be, as parents want them to be. In order for students to have good, solid foundational knowledge, we need to be teaching our students about the world around them. And so it will leave educators, school district officials in this gray area of how do you make sure that students get what they need, but also, you know, if this bill were to become law, then how do we go through and determine what is appropriate and what is not?
I think it's very interesting too, President Kelly, your remarks made me think about the role in which now educators are going to have to play policing speech. Where an individual now is speaking about their lived experience as a student, or even a teacher is speaking about their lived experience and applying that in an education setting. This will be illegal now. When we think about the level of experience and how that plays into the education system, a lot of real-time experiences go into classroom instruction. Right. Now there is a lens or a litmus that is going to hinder an individual teaching life skills, teaching social sciences. There is a lot of different reasons why we have to be very careful about policing student engagement. And some of the language that I'm seeing here in the bill, I think, is very alarming too. One thing in particular that I think they are trying to say is DEI programs promote a worldview that demand people, especially young students, to judge others based on their sex, race, or other factors and attack true diversity of thought. That's not true at all. But it shows exactly how biased individuals that crafted this language are and how far removed they are from what's actually happening in the classrooms.
Absolutely. And I think kind of wanting to stay there for a moment, thinking about bias in the classroom. And I know we focused a lot around our students, but thinking about the educators as well. Could this legislation, not just 227, but 171 and other legislation that we may see like it, does it set precedents for walking some of the progress that we've seen back when we think about implicit bias trainings, when we think about other programs that schools are offering for educators specifically? Does this set the tone to be like, you know what, we may not need those programs anymore. We may not need to make that investment anymore. What does that look like?
Well, it really does put a chilling effect on what educators may want to explore in a way to better themselves as educators. We have already seen that chilling effect taking place when other bills very similar like to this have been filed. And we have seen that ripple across local school boards as well around adoption of some language that had been introduced in the General Assembly, didn't pass, but was instituted on the local school board level. But one of the things that's really notable in this bill, particularly Senate Bill 227, is that there is a piece in here that would bar educators from getting professional renewal credit for seeking outside professional development on these outlined divisive concepts. And so just for everyone to know, a large percentage of the North Carolina teaching workforce and the national teaching workforce is primarily white and primarily women. There is a smaller number of educators of color, both nationally and in North Carolina. However, the student demographics in North Carolina continue to trend upward to be a majority students of color, Black and brown students. And so many educators are seeking professional development in order to learn how to recognize and understand other cultures beyond themselves, and also trying to build and bring that cultural awareness into the classroom to better reach those student populations that is different than their own. This would keep those educators and educators of color who are working with communities outside of their own as well from learning about those communities and seeking professional development, and also hinder them from renewing their license. We are in the middle of an educator shortage here in North Carolina, one that is man-made by this General Assembly due to the culture of lack of respect and pay for our educators. We can't afford to lose educators in North Carolina, and we need them in front of our students in order to make sure our students continue to grow and thrive, and we are at a deficit here in our state. And so this will be one other measure that repels educators from coming to the state of North Carolina and ultimately harming the progress of the state of North Carolina.
Absolutely. Did you want to say anything else?
No, I think it is very interesting that in a moment when our state still is at the bottom in regards to teacher pay, the bottom in regards to per pupil spending, where we are failing to meet the minimum requirement of our Constitution. Now they're putting more barriers to education and support for teachers. There are a lot of individuals across the state that right now are looking to see whether or not our schools are going to adequately educate their children and prepare them for a global future. That global future is now going to be hindered in a very real way by individuals that probably don't even have children in public schools, probably haven't been inside a public school, but are using a Trump mandate to whitewash and to tell a different story of our history and our success. North Carolina has a very vibrant history of educating all students. At one point in time, the entire state was uneducated, illiterate, and it was individuals working at the end of Reconstruction to implement public schools which have rivaled school districts across the country.
Right.
When people talk about making America great again or North Carolina great again, that history in North Carolina has been a multiracial history that has been investing in every single person.
Right.
But what they're doing here is, if not more divisive, it is taking us to a position in North Carolina that is not going to make us a lucrative place to be and learn and work, a place for businesses to want to come in. And especially with these provisions on top of an already overburdened school system, I'm scared to see exactly what it's going to look like in the end result of our students' quality of learning under these bills.
Absolutely. And so as we walk through Senate Bill 227, as we walk through HB 171, thinking about now, what can people do now? So we're still in the early stages of the Senate bill, a little bit down the line with the House bill, but what can folks do? What's the call to action?
So I think the first thing everybody can make sure we do is to stay informed. Project 2025 was over 900 pages. This bill, 3 pages long. The bill, House Bill 171, 2 pages long. So it doesn't take a huge education background or an understanding of policy to look at exactly what they're doing. And I think it's very important now that we also, as we're reading and understanding, that we're talking about this at a local level. A lot of the individuals, I'm looking at Senators Berger, Lee, Overcash, these are individuals that live in rural parts of the state.
That's right.
Already in desolate situations in regards to the outcomes and conditions of public schools in those areas. They can't afford to have an further hindrance to education outcomes. We should be talking to these individuals. We don't have to wait till they come to Raleigh. We can talk to them in their district. And I think more importantly, we need to be in partnership with our advocates and partners, with folks like NCAE that are doing this work around the clock, that are working to make sure that our parents, our educators, our public school professionals are all on the same page, because we are all going to be worse off if we let individuals control our lives and our destiny because we're not working together. And so the biggest thing we can be doing is talking to your teachers about this, talking to your principals about this, and following what NCAE is doing every single day, advocating for public schools.
Absolutely. Did you want to add anything?
Yes, I would echo all those things. They are very correct. I think it's really important that people know that your voice matters in what happens here. It is so important for people to call their legislator, to go see them when they return home, and to explain this and its impacts to your legislator, but also to your fellow community members as well. People don't really know what is going to happen until it happens to them and to their schools. And so it is really important for people to raise the level of conversation about this. But I also want to take it out of just talking about race too, as you illustrated. Students with disabilities, students who speak multiple languages, our veteran students, our military affected students, they are all categories in which they would fall under banning DEI, or diversity, equity, inclusion, because there are targeted interventions to those populations of students that could be removed based on the language of this bill. And so if you are a military connected family, if you are a parent or caregiver of a student with a disability, you speak English as a second language or third or fourth, because we love multilingual families, then this would impact you too, not just on the condition of race, but also we're talking about ability. We're talking about any provisions that favor girls over boys, because we're talking about race, class, sex, and gender, and all of those things would fall under these categories. So your voice matters here, because the work of our public schools is literally the foundation of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Absolutely. And so I believe that we have our marching orders, which is stay engaged, make sure that you are reading up on the legislation, but also have conversations with your elected officials. They work for us, and so get comfortable with having those conversations. Ask them more details about these pieces of legislation that they're presenting. What does it mean? What could it mean for your community? Tell your story. That is what we're asking for you to do. And we actually, for Advance Carolina, have a live call to action on our website. So you can just go to advancecarolina.org and you can engage that live call to action around HB 171, as well as directions for Senate Bill 227, and just keep engaged. And as we know more, we'll say more. But for now, thank you, Tamika. Thank you, Marcus, for joining in on this conversation. And we will see you for the next installment of Advance Notice. Take care.